She walked into the luxury car dealership, dressed in faded jeans and a simple white t-shirt, her sneakers making a soft sound as they tapped against the shiny marble floor. The sales associate immediately gave her a skeptical, dismissive look, his gaze sliding over her black skin and modest outfit, before landing with contempt. "I'm sorry," he said coldly, a smirk curling on his lips as he gestured with disdain toward the door. "But I think you may have come to the wrong place. The cars here aren't for everyone. Our cheapest model is $300,000. Other employees exchanged amused glances, and a few customers curiously turned to watch her. Maggie felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, a choking sense of shame rising in her chest. She turned silently and walked away, leaving behind mocking laughter and whispered judgments. But the next morning, the entire showroom fell into stunned silence as a gleaming Rolls-Royce Phantom slowly came to a stop right in front of the dealership. And when the back door of the car opened, revealing the person inside, the salesman's face froze in disbelief, his mouth hanging open in shock. He never could have imagined this moment. That Friday morning, the soft sunlight filtered through the polished glass windows of Boston Luxury Motors, the city's most exclusive dealership, which regularly hosted wealthy clients willing to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to flaunt their status and reputation. The automatic glass door opened gently, and inside walked a middle-aged black woman. This woman was Maggie Collins, who had just turned 45. Maggie was of average height, her body fit but graceful and modest. Her thick black hair was neatly tied back, and she wore a simple white t-shirt and jeans that had slightly faded from repeated washing. Her old, well-maintained sneakers were carefully cleaned before she came. From the moment she stepped into the showroom, Maggie immediately felt the sharp, scrutinizing gazes upon her. The salespeople in their expensive suits glanced at her with suspicion, as though she had accidentally walked into a world that didn't belong to her. The stares, full of curiosity and even a hint of disdain, seemed to remind her that she didn't belong here. A middle-aged black woman, dressed far too casually. Maggie sighed softly. She was used to such looks. Throughout her life, she had often endured them, but what troubled her wasn't the hurt to herself, but the helplessness in the face of the deep-rooted prejudices many in society still held. Maggie maintained her calm composure, trying to ignore the glances as she made her way deeper into the showroom. Inside, the Boston Luxury Motors dealership was sparkling and opulent, each gleaming car carefully arranged to make the strongest impression on potential customers. Prestigious names like Ferrari, Aston Martin, Rolls-Royce, Bentley Continental, GT Mulliner, each one exuded power and wealth. Maggie stopped in front of a shining blue Bentley Continental GT Mulliner, her eyes filled with admiration and satisfaction as she carefully observed the car's perfect lines. Behind the reception desk, Blake Thompson, the tall white sales manager, impeccably dressed but cold in demeanor, immediately noticed Maggie the moment she entered. He quietly turned to his colleagues, saying something in a low voice before chuckling smugly. The other salespeople followed suit, as if waiting for a show to unfold before them. With a calm demeanor, Maggie silently approached the Bentley Continental GT Mulliner, gently running her hand over its surface as if imagining the joy her sister would feel receiving such a special gift. What Maggie didn't know was that in just a few moments her dignity and self-worth would once again be tested by the narrow-minded, unfair judgments of others. And in that corner of the showroom, Blake Thompson began adjusting his tie, a smug smile spreading across his face as he slowly walked toward Maggie. This meeting would mark the beginning of a story neither of them would ever forget. A story about self-respect, human worth, and the profound lesson: never judge a person by their appearance or the color of their skin. Just as Maggie was admiring the Bentley Continental GT Mulliner, lost in the luxurious curves of its glossy paint, a voice interrupted her from behind, polite yet cold and calculating. "Excuse me, ma'am, how can I help you?" Maggie turned gently. Standing before her was Blake Thompson, the dealership manager, with a professional but strained smile. Blake was a white man in his early 40s, tall, with neatly trimmed dark blonde hair, and a perfectly fitted black suit. His cold blue eyes quickly scanned Maggie, from her simple t-shirt down to her worn-out sneakers, his gaze filled with skepticism mixed with a hint of contempt. "Hello, I'm interested in this car," Maggie responded calmly, maintaining her polite and composed demeanor. "The Bentley Continental GT Billionaire, right? It's a beautiful car." Blake raised an eyebrow, the corners of his mouth curling into a faint, condescending smile. He was known at Boston Luxury Motors for his ability to judge customers within seconds of meeting them. To Blake, it was not just a skill but a point of pride. He always believed he could accurately identify who was a worthy customer for the luxury vehicles on display. "Yes, this is the latest Bentley Continental GT Billionaire, but I'm afraid you may have misunderstood something," Blake replied in a falsely polite tone, deliberately emphasizing the words misunderstood, as if Maggie were in the wrong place, unfit for the showroom. Maggie blinked in slight surprise, her brown eyes narrowing slightly, but she kept her calm and asked, "Misunderstood?" Blake nodded slightly, his gaze still cool and filled with pressure. He adjusted his dark green tie and spoke slowly. "This Bentley, as you can see, is a limited Billionaire edition. It's exclusively for VIP clients who've made a reservation. Normally, our customers don't accidentally walk in and buy a car like this on a whim." Every word Blake spoke carried a subtle air of arrogance, skillfully implying that Maggie wasn't even remotely qualified to be near the car, let alone own it. Around the showroom, several other salespeople began to take notice of the conversation. Their eyes discreetly turned toward Maggie, eagerly awaiting how the middle-aged black woman with the modest appearance would react to Blake's cold and superior attitude. Though Maggie was familiar with such situations, her heart still tightened slightly. It wasn't because she was angry or hurt, but because of the deep disappointment in the fact that these prejudices still lingered in society, subtly embedded in every glance and word. Yet Maggie remained poised, her dignity intact. She looked directly at Blake, speaking softly but firmly. "I wasn't aware I needed to make an appointment. Perhaps I missed some information on your website." Blake immediately flashed a smile tinged with mockery, glancing quickly at his colleagues as if to further confirm his assumptions. He then continued in a tone loud enough for those around him to hear. "That's quite possible, ma'am. In fact, we usually only serve customers whom we're sure are serious about their financial capability. Apologies if I'm being blunt, but this is not the kind of car anyone can just casually buy." Blake's words were like an invisible knife, carrying the full weight of his prejudices. His judgment was based not just on Maggie's clothing, but also on her skin color and social status. The atmosphere in the showroom grew tense and suffocating. The other salespeople exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one dared to intervene. Blake remained standing, his gaze cold and self-satisfied, certain that he had perfectly assessed the situation. Maggie didn't respond immediately. She stood still for a few seconds, taking a deep breath to maintain control over her emotions. Finally, she gently spoke. "Thank you for the explanation. I understand exactly what you mean." But deep inside, Maggie knew this was just the beginning. She had no intention of backing down, for ahead lay a greater lesson. Not just for Blake Thompson, but for everyone witnessing his attitude today. At this moment, Blake Thompson had no idea just how grave a mistake he had made. He didn't know that Maggie was not just an ordinary black woman standing before him, but a woman who would teach him a valuable lesson about respect and the true worth of every individual. As soon as Maggie responded calmly to Blake, a tense silence filled the luxurious showroom. Maggie could feel the eyes of those around her, both curious and expectant. It seemed as though they were watching the reaction of the casually dressed black woman to Blake's arrogant and dismissive attitude. Maggie took a deep breath, offering a polite smile, trying to keep her voice calm and gentle. "I really do want to see this car. Could you please show me the interior?" Blake was slightly surprised by Maggie's polite and patient response. He raised an eyebrow at her once more, then shook his head in a way that was almost unnoticeable. Blake had always trusted his instincts without question. To him, this woman was clearly not a potential customer, but just someone indulging in a fantasy, trying to prove something that didn't fit her. "Ma'am," Blake deliberately emphasized each word, his voice firm but laced with sarcasm. "As I mentioned, this car is only available for VIP customers with an appointment. I'm sorry, but I'm afraid you won't be able to see the interior today." Maggie gently tilted her head, never once breaking eye contact with Blake. She held a brief silence, her gaze gentle yet resolute. "I understand what you're saying, but this is a special gift for my sister. She just won her battle with cancer after a long and difficult treatment. This car means a lot to her, and I want to make sure it's the right fit for her." Maggie's voice was sincere, soft, yet powerful. Some of the employees nearby appeared taken aback by this emotional reason, but Blake remained unmoved. On the contrary, his attitude became even more condescending. Blake quickly scanned Maggie once again, his cold eyes briefly dropping to her worn sneakers, then replied with a dismissive tone, tinged with impatience. "I'm very sorry to hear about your sister's situation, but as you can see, the Bentley Continental GT Mulliner is not a car you can casually buy. If you're really looking for something within your budget, I think you should visit the used car lot a few blocks down. I'm sure you'll find something more suitable there." Blake's words landed like a crushing blow, striking directly at Maggie's self-respect, and the silence around her grew heavy, suffocating. Some of the other employees quickly looked down or turned their faces away, trying to avoid meeting Maggie's eyes, but they could all clearly hear the venomous words coming from their manager's mouth. Maggie felt her heart tighten once again. It wasn't that she hadn't encountered such contempt before, but every time it happened, the pain resurfaced, sharp as if it were the first time. She gently clenched her fist, deciding not to let anger or bitterness break her calm. Maggie spoke deliberately. "I'm sorry to have bothered you, but I don't think I need a used car dealership." Her gaze became firmer now, but still carried the composed demeanor of a woman with dignity and experience. She looked Blake directly in the eye, as if to affirm that a person's true worth isn't measured by their clothes, appearance, or skin color. "I am fully capable of affording this car. I would appreciate it if you could allow me to see the interior." Maggie's request this time was clear and strong, but her tone remained so polite that it couldn't be faulted. Blake was briefly taken aback by her unwavering resolve. He glanced over at the other employees nearby, then let out a light, mocking laugh before responding with blunt words that showed no attempt to hide his contempt. "Sorry, ma'am. I don't think either of us should waste any more time on this pointless matter. I'm sure the used car lot will have something more appropriate for you." After speaking, Blake turned his back and walked away, not bothering to wait for Maggie's reply, as if he had just finished a pointless drama. The other employees exchanged looks of sympathy mixed with curiosity, but quickly dispersed as if nothing had happened. Maggie stood silently next to the luxurious Bentley Continental GT Mulliner, a feeling of emptiness and hurt swelling inside her. But more than anything, Maggie knew she wouldn't give up that easily. She wasn't going to leave the showroom until Blake Thompson understood just how big a mistake he had made. She slowly turned her gaze toward Blake, silently telling herself that the fight against unjust prejudice would continue, and she was ready to let Blake and everyone in that showroom realize that the true worth of a person lies deep within, not in the superficial things they worship. As Maggie stood silently next to the gleaming blue Bentley Continental GT Mulliner, struggling to suppress her sense of disappointment at Blake's cold and dismissive attitude, a wealthy white couple in expensive designer clothes appeared at the front door of the showroom. Blake immediately changed his demeanor, replacing his earlier cold expression with a warm and enthusiastic smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, it's so wonderful to see you again," Blake said cheerfully, stepping quickly toward them and shaking their hands in a friendly manner, his voice carrying throughout the showroom. His gaze briefly flicked over Maggie, as if emphasizing the difference between the worthy customers and the woman standing next to the luxury car. "We came to see the Bentley you mentioned the other day," the woman said, her eyes briefly flicking to Maggie, a mixture of surprise and a touch of suspicion crossing her face. Blake smiled even wider, subtly placing his hand on the car Maggie was standing next to. "What a coincidence! This is the very Bentley Continental GT Mulliner. A limited edition masterpiece that perfectly matches your status, Mr. and Mrs. Harrington. I'm sure this car will elevate your standing in the upper echelons of society." At this point, Blake deliberately turned toward Maggie, glancing over her with an implied look of superiority, and then spoke louder, just enough for Maggie to hear every word clearly. "Of course, not everyone is suited to own a car like this. It's a pity that some people clearly don't know their true place in this world." The showroom suddenly fell into an eerie silence. The salespeople nearby froze, and all eyes were on Maggie. The Harrington couple exchanged puzzled glances, but stood silently, observing the unfolding situation. A few other customers browsing cars also turned to look at Maggie, their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity, pity, and awkwardness. Blake didn't stop there. He took a step closer to Maggie, offering a mocking smile, and raising his voice sarcastically, as if to ensure everyone heard his words clearly. "Madam, this is a place for people who can afford it, and frankly, you're clearly not someone who belongs in this world. I think you should save your time and ours, and kindly leave and go somewhere more suited to you." Blake's words struck Maggie like a slap in the face, causing a sharp, painful sensation of humiliation. All eyes were now on her, and the atmosphere in the showroom grew tense and suffocating. Maggie felt her cheeks burning, her heart pounding with the sting of this extreme insult, but she stood still, refusing to let tears or anger show on her face. She knew that losing her composure would only serve to please Blake. Blake turned back to the Harrington couple, a proud and smug smile spreading across his face. "I sincerely apologize for this awkward situation. Sometimes we have to deal with customers who wander in here and think they can easily integrate into the upper class. But I'm sure you understand that these valuable cars aren't meant for everyone." Maggie remained standing, her gaze fixed firmly on Blake. Her eyes now reflected a deep sense of resolve, calm despite the tremor of offense and hurt inside her. But deep down, Maggie knew Blake had made a huge mistake, and she would not let this story end so easily. Finally, she spoke to Blake, her voice polite but firm, each word clear and strong. "Thank you for pointing out the place you think I belong. But perhaps it's you who doesn't truly know where your own place is." With that, Maggie gave him a sharp, piercing look, then slowly turned and walked away in the tense silence of the showroom. Though behind her, curious, surprised, and pitying eyes followed, Maggie walked with her dignity intact, head held high, without hesitation. She knew that today Blake had deliberately pushed her to the depths of humiliation. But Maggie understood very well that this story was far from over. It was time for Blake Thompson and all those witnessing this act of prejudice to realize just how wrong they were in judging a person based on appearance and skin color. And Maggie was certain that before long, Blake would face the most valuable lesson of his life. As Maggie turned to walk away in the heavy silence of the showroom, a powerful voice suddenly broke the tense atmosphere from behind her. "Is there a problem here, Blake?" Maggie slowly stopped and turned slightly. The person who had appeared was Richard Mason, the owner of Boston Luxury Motors. Richard was a man in his 50s, refined, with carefully groomed gray hair and a luxurious gray suit that highlighted his calm and composed demeanor. The expression on Richard's face clearly showed his displeasure at the unusual tension in his store. Blake immediately stepped toward Richard, speaking politely but with confidence, his eyes clearly directed at Maggie. "Nothing serious, Mr. Mason. Just a small misunderstanding. This woman wanted to see the Bentley Continental GT Mulliner, but clearly she's not the right kind of customer. I explained it nicely, but she doesn't seem too happy about it." Richard silently looked at Maggie from head to toe, as if reassessing the situation. His gaze was sharp and experienced, but unfortunately, it also carried deep prejudices, much like Blake's. Maggie felt her heart sink. The small glimmer of hope she'd felt when Richard appeared quickly fading. "I'm sorry, but I don't really see any misunderstanding here," Maggie said in a calm voice, looking directly at Richard. "I just want to be treated equally like any other customer who walks in here. But it seems your employee has seriously misjudged me just based on my appearance." Richard Mason furrowed his brow and looked at Maggie again, but his face remained cold and stern, the usual serious expression still present. After a few seconds of tense silence, Richard gently placed a hand on Blake's shoulder, clearly showing his support for his trusted employee, then spoke carefully but still with a coldness. "Miss Collins, right? I think Blake did exactly what our policy dictates. You must understand that not everyone who walks in here can expect immediate service, especially with limited models like the Bentley. Blake was just doing his job, protecting the interests of our important customers." Each word from Richard came slowly, thoughtfully, but as sharp as invisible knives, once again deepening the pain and humiliation that Maggie was enduring. Not only Blake, but now Richard, the most powerful person at the showroom, was openly siding with the mistake, complicit in the clear discrimination that had just taken place. "I understand," Maggie said softly, trying to conceal the deep disappointment she felt. "But I truly don't think your policies should discriminate against customers based on their appearance and skin color." The showroom fell back into a heavy silence. The employees around her stood still, their confused gazes directed at their boss, but no one dared to speak up in defense of Maggie. Richard Mason, seemingly wanting to end the awkward conversation, cleared his throat and then decisively said, "I think we've made ourselves clear, Miss Collins. If you truly want to see a car, you can make an appointment for another time. For today, I suggest you not waste any more of our staff's time." Richard then turned to Blake, giving him a small nod as if signaling that the matter was closed. Blake immediately bowed his head slightly, flashing a smug, self-satisfied smile, his eyes scanning Maggie once more with a clear challenge and contempt. Maggie stood motionless in the opulent showroom, her heart aching and bitterly wounded. Until now, Maggie still couldn't believe what she had just gone through. Blake's contempt had been more than enough, but what hurt even more was Richard Mason's ruthless complicity, the very person who should have stood for fairness and professionalism here. Finally, Maggie took a deep breath, holding her composure and dignity, then spoke softly for the last time, her voice controlled but still powerful. "Thank you for showing me exactly how this dealership operates. I truly understand now." And as she walked out of the showroom doors, Maggie knew that this story was far from over. Blake and Richard Mason would soon have to face the consequences of the discrimination and prejudice they had just caused today. As for her, Maggie Collins would continue forward with the dignity and self-respect of a woman who had never bowed to injustice, especially the injustice stemming from narrow-mindedness and racial prejudices. As the luxurious glass door of the Boston Luxury Motors showroom closed behind her, Maggie stepped outside, the weight of what had just happened pressing down with every step. The sky remained clear, and the sunlight still shone as brightly as when she first entered, but now it felt harsher, more blinding than ever. In stark contrast to the strength and determination she had tried to project inside the dealership, Maggie's heart was now full of invisible wounds slowly bleeding from the shame she had just endured. She walked slowly down the quiet street towards her parking spot, trying to control her breathing, struggling to regain her composure. Blake's contemptuous words echoed sharply in her ears like a broken record, each repetition causing a pang of pain deep in her chest. But perhaps what hurt Maggie the most was not just his cruel words, but the indifferent, complicit coldness of Richard Mason, the owner who should have stood up to protect a customer and fought against such racial discrimination. Maggie sighed softly as she sat in her own car. She glanced briefly at her reflection in the rearview mirror, the sight of her tired, wounded eyes filling her with sorrow. Despite the many times she had faced prejudice in the past, every instance still struck her heart with deep, unrelenting pain. Perhaps this pain wasn't just hers, but for so many others like her, those who had and were still enduring cruel stereotypes simply because of the color of their skin. Throughout the drive back to her mansion, Maggie was lost in heavy thoughts and bitter memories. Even as she drove past the grand gates of the luxurious estate nestled in the wealthiest suburb of Boston, surrounded by acres of lush greenery, the pain did not lift. The mansion she shared with her husband, Alexander, was a serene and private space. Alexander Collins, a billionaire renowned across the country for his groundbreaking achievements in clean technology, had always chosen a simple life, away from the media spotlight. That was one of the things Maggie loved most about him. He was a successful man, but humble, living simply, and always caring deeply about social issues that many other wealthy people chose to ignore. When Maggie entered the house, she saw Alexander sitting quietly in the living room, his eyes focused intently on his laptop. He looked up when he heard the door open, smiling gently as usual. But as soon as he saw her face, he instantly recognized something was wrong. He quickly closed his laptop, stood up, and walked briskly toward her, gently taking her hand. "What's wrong, love? You don't look okay at all." Just hearing those simple words made tears well up in Maggie's eyes. She had tried so hard to hold it together in front of Blake and Richard, but now, in front of the man she trusted most in the world, all the emotions she had been holding back came crashing down. Alexander gently held her in his arms, not saying another word, allowing Maggie to rest her head on his shoulder as her tears silently fell. He understood that she wasn't weak. Maggie was a strong woman, but he also knew that sometimes the strongest people were the ones most deeply hurt by life's injustices. It took some time, but once Maggie had regained her composure, she sat down beside Alexander and began telling him everything that had happened at the luxury car showroom. She spoke of Blake's contemptuous attitude, the disdainful glances from the other employees, and the chilling silence, the disappointing complicity of Richard Mason. "You know, Alexander," Maggie said, her voice thick with emotion. The hardest part wasn't being disrespected or insulted. I could get past that. But what hurts the most is that things like this are still happening every day to so many others like me, just because they're people of color. They have no voice, no one to stand up for them, and they just have to accept being trampled on over and over again. Maggie paused, trying to take a deep breath to steady herself before continuing. Today, when Richard Mason appeared, I had hoped, even if just for a moment, that he would do the right thing, that he would stand up for fairness. But in the end, he was just like Blake. Worse even, because he's the one in charge. He has the power, but he chose to remain silent and be complicit in that wrong. Alexander took her hand tightly, his eyes filled with empathy and sorrow as he listened to her words. He knew Maggie had always been strong in the face of society's prejudice, but this time, the pain she had suffered had perhaps reached its breaking point. "I know you're hurting, Maggie," Alexander said softly, "but you're not alone in this fight. I'm here, right beside you. We won't stay silent, and we won't let them keep going like this." Maggie looked up at her husband, a sense of relief washing over her as she realized that, in her deepest pain, she was not alone. Alexander had always been her rock, the one person who made her feel strong enough to face and change this sad reality. And Maggie knew this was just the beginning of a larger struggle, not just for her, but for many others like her, those who had suffered far too long because of society's harsh prejudices. It was time for their voices to be heard, for their stories to be understood, and above all, for them to be treated with the dignity and respect they had always deserved. Alexander gently took Maggie's hand, as if he wanted to transfer all the comfort and sympathy from his heart to hers. He understood that Maggie had just endured a bitter experience, and it made his heart ache with a dull, throbbing pain. After a long silence, Alexander spoke softly. "My love, if you agree, I can step in immediately. I can't just stand by and watch them insult you and let everything pass so easily." His voice was still gentle, but there was a strong sense of determination behind it. A man known for being reserved and avoiding unnecessary arguments, but this time he felt he couldn't stay out of it. Not only because the person hurt was the woman he loved most, but also because of the blatant racism Maggie had to endure right in the heart of Boston, a city that always prided itself on its civilization and equality. Maggie looked up at her husband, gently shaking her head, a soft smile on her lips, though her eyes were still filled with sadness. "I understand what you mean, Alexander, but honestly, I don't want any kind of revenge. Revenge through power or money won't teach them anything. It might just reinforce their belief that we need to use strength and wealth to earn respect." Alexander remained silent, looking at his wife with admiration and love. This was Maggie, the woman he had always admired, not only for her outer beauty, but for her compassionate soul, deeply understanding the social issues that plagued society. Maggie had never chosen revenge to solve a problem, because she understood that revenge was not a solution. It would only prolong hatred forever. Maggie gently squeezed Alexander's hand, continuing with a soft yet firm voice. "What I truly want, is for them to realize they were wrong. Blake, Richard Mason, and everyone like them, they need to fully understand that racism, whether overt or subtle, is wrong and unacceptable in today's society." Alexander was silent for a moment, his expression growing more thoughtful. He understood Maggie's point. Instead of using power or wealth to force the wrongdoers to suffer, what Maggie truly wanted was a change in their awareness, a deep transformation in their hearts. This was far more difficult than simple revenge, but it was the only way to create lasting, meaningful change. After a moment of thought, Alexander nodded in agreement. "You're right, Maggie. But for them to truly understand the wrong they've done, we need a clear plan. We can't just sit by and hope that one day they will wake up. They need an experience, a lesson profound enough to make them realize it." Maggie nodded gently, her eyes lighting up with a glimmer of hope, a hint of determination. "Exactly. We need to do something not to punish them, but to help them open their hearts and see the world they live in more clearly. I want them to meet directly with the people they've always looked down on, so they can see that the value of a person is never in their appearance or skin color, but in their dignity, kindness, and what they contribute to the community." Alexander looked at Maggie, his eyes full of admiration and respect. He gently squeezed her hand, his voice becoming more decisive and energized than ever. "You've reminded me of the most important thing, Maggie. I think we should organize a special event at the Collins Foundation, a gathering, a dialogue between Black children and families who have suffered from racial discrimination, and people like Blake Thompson and Richard Mason. We won't force them to attend, but we'll give them the opportunity to face the prejudices they hold." Maggie smiled gently, feeling a sense of relief as she heard her husband's idea. This was exactly what she was hoping for. Not revenge, but education and awakening. Maggie knew that, to change people's minds, sometimes all it took was an honest meeting, a gentle touch, or a heartfelt conversation, and a person's heart could be opened in the most unexpected way. "What do you think about inviting both Blake and Richard Mason as special guests, but also allowing them to directly listen and talk to those they've always looked down on?" Alexander continued, his eyes full of excitement. "That's a brilliant idea," Maggie replied immediately, "but we need to ensure they truly understand the purpose of the event, so they don't see it as a mandatory obligation, but as an opportunity to honestly reflect on themselves." Alexander nodded, his expression now full of determination. "We'll do it that way. I'll extend the invitation in a very polite and sincere manner. I'll make sure they understand that this event is not meant to embarrass or humiliate them, but to provide a valuable opportunity for them to broaden their perspective and awareness." Maggie looked deeply into Alexander's eyes, her heart filled with gratitude and relief. She understood that the fight against racism was a long road, but she was not alone. Alexander was always there by her side, ready to walk with her through every step of this difficult journey. As the evening sunlight slowly faded outside the window, the two of them continued discussing the specifics of this grand plan. And Maggie knew that what they were doing wasn't just about changing the mindset of a few individuals, but sending a powerful, humane message to the entire surrounding community, that kindness, respect, and racial equality are values that we all need to cherish and preserve in this life. The next morning, the soft golden sunlight spread evenly over the elegant streets of Boston. In front of the transparent glass doors of the Boston Luxury Motors showroom, Blake Thompson was leaning casually against the reception desk, sipping his espresso while chatting with a few colleagues nearby. The atmosphere in the showroom was relaxed, as if the awkward incident with Maggie Collins yesterday had already faded into a distant, insignificant memory. From his office, Richard Mason stepped out in his usual sharp gray suit, his stern face as serious as ever. He glanced over the shiny cars, satisfied that everything was neat, orderly, and fully prepared to welcome high-end customers. Although he didn't voice it, Richard still felt a slight twinge of guilt when recalling the situation with Maggie the day before. However, he quickly dismissed the thought, reassuring himself that Blake had followed protocol and that the dealership's policy simply couldn't be flexible when it came to certain types of customers. As the showroom remained quietly calm, the deep, powerful hum of an engine suddenly echoed from outside. The sound grew louder, as if the car was approaching the glass doors. Blake immediately turned to look outside, his eyes widening in surprise when he saw the sleek, mysterious black car coming to a gentle stop right in front of the dealership. "My God!" Blake exclaimed, quickly placing his coffee cup down on the counter and rushing toward the door. It was a limited edition Rolls-Royce Phantom extended wheelbase, its glossy paint so reflective that it seemed to mirror every tiny ray of sunlight. The car was worth well over $1.2 million, and only true billionaires could afford such a luxury. Richard Mason also took notice of this arrival right away. He quickly walked over to Blake, adjusted his tie, and leaned in slightly to whisper to his trusted manager. "Blake, make sure to treat this customer well. A deal with the owner of that Phantom could be exactly what we've been waiting for." Blake nodded quickly, his eyes bright with ambition. He knew the value of the car before him, and understood that if he could close this deal, his reputation at Boston Luxury Motors would be more secure than ever. The car door slowly opened, and the person stepping out caused every showroom employee to hold their breath. It was a man in his early 50s, impeccably dressed, powerful, yet composed. His perfectly tailored navy suit, his silver-streaked hair carefully groomed, all created an aura of absolute class that only those truly wealthy could possess. Blake quickly stepped forward, offering the widest smile he could muster. "Welcome to Boston Luxury Motors. I'm Blake Thompson, the sales manager here. How may I assist you today, sir?" The well-dressed man looked at Blake for a long moment with sharp, penetrating eyes, but there was no obvious emotion in his gaze. After a brief pause, he gently took Blake's outstretched hand and replied in a calm, deliberate voice, "I'm Alexander Collins." Hearing that familiar name, Blake felt his heart skip a beat for a brief moment. However, he quickly pushed the strange feeling aside, reassuring himself that it was probably just a coincidence. He regained his composure and gave a confident smile to Alexander. "Very pleased to meet you, Mr. Collins. I see you have an extraordinary car. Surely you're looking for another addition to your luxurious collection." Alexander remained silent for a moment, still studying Blake with an inscrutable gaze. Finally, he gave a small nod and spoke in his deep, clear voice. "Yes, I'm looking for something special as a gift, and I've heard your dealership has a limited edition Bentley Continental GT Mulliner that's worth noting." Blake's face immediately brightened, and he quickly glanced over at Richard Mason, still watching from a distance. Richard responded with a satisfied look and a slight nod, clearly hopeful about the upcoming deal. "Indeed, Mr. Collins, you've come to the right place. We have a very rare Bentley Continental GT Mulliner in stock. It's a stunning car, designed specifically for high-end customers like yourself," Blake said proudly. Alexander gave a slight nod, his expression thoughtful and hard to read. Then, unexpectedly, he asked a question with a subtle implication. "However, I hear that this car requires an appointment to view it in person. Is that correct?" Blake was momentarily taken aback, his expression shifting slightly at the question. He quickly masked his discomfort and responded, "Of course, Mr. Collins, but for a customer like you, we're always willing to be flexible." Alexander studied Blake intently for another long moment, before offering a barely perceptible smile. "I understand. But I do value consistency in the policies of a luxury dealership like this." With that, Alexander glanced quickly toward Richard Mason, his eyes carrying a deeper meaning. Richard immediately moved closer, attempting to diffuse the suddenly tense atmosphere. "Mr. Collins, we are committed to providing the best service to every esteemed client such as yourself. We truly hope to have the opportunity to serve and build a long-lasting partnership with you." Alexander regarded Richard cautiously, giving a slight smile once more, though it carried an enigmatic undertone. "I hope so as well, Mr. Mason. But perhaps we should first clarify the policies of this showroom." Blake and Richard, still unsure of what was happening, kept their hopeful smiles in place. Both were filled with anticipation of the multi-million-dollar deal they believed was just around the corner, completely unaware that behind Alexander Collins' unexpected and elegant appearance lay a carefully crafted plan, one designed to teach them a valuable lesson they would never forget. As the air of hope and ambition still hung around Blake and Richard, Alexander Collins calmly walked around the Bentley Continental GT Mulliner, his fingers lightly brushing against the car's glossy paint, as if deep in thought. His sharp eyes slowly scanned every detail, but it seemed he was focusing on something far more profound than the car's exterior shine. Blake stood nearby, eager, his eyes never leaving Alexander's every movement, hoping that this wealthy customer would bring in a big deal for him and the dealership. Behind Blake, Richard Mason stood silently, patiently, his usual elegant demeanor now even more emphasized by the gentle, confident smile on his face. Finally, Alexander stopped, turned to face both Blake and Richard directly. His calm, unreadable expression remained, but his gaze had changed, sharper, even somewhat stern, leaving Blake momentarily uneasy. Before Blake could speak, Alexander gently broke the silence, his voice steady but every word clear, carrying a surprising weight and seriousness. "Before we continue discussing any business, I think we need to address something very important." Blake paused, his expression faltering slightly. He quickly glanced at Richard as if seeking help, but Richard too appeared confused, unsure of what was happening. Alexander didn't make them wait long. He took a step forward, looked Blake straight in the eyes, and spoke slowly, his powerful voice filled with authority. "I'm not here today because I actually need another car. I'm here because of my wife, Maggie Collins." When the name Maggie Collins was clearly and deliberately spoken from Alexander's lips, Blake immediately felt a cold shiver run down his spine, as though all the strength and confidence he had just built up vanished in an instant. Blake's eyes widened in disbelief, and for a brief moment his face drained of color, unable to mask the shock and bewilderment. "Maggie Collins," Blake muttered, his voice trembling, almost inaudible. Alexander nodded slightly, his gaze unwavering as he watched Blake's face for any change. "That's right, Maggie Collins, the middle-aged black woman, simply dressed, whom you and Mr. Mason here so rudely refused to serve yesterday, insulting her with prejudice because of her appearance and the color of her skin." Alexander emphasized each word, his tone still calm but with an undeniable severity. Richard Mason, standing behind, clearly heard every word. His face instantly changed, the confidence he usually carried slipping away completely. The truth about Maggie Collins, the woman he had callously conspired with Blake to demean the day before, hit him like a direct blow to his pride. Richard quickly realized the dangerous situation they were in, a situation that could lead to severe losses, not only financially but also in terms of the dealership's reputation. Blake fumbled for words, but panic and embarrassment left him stuttering, unable to form coherent thoughts. "Mr. Collins, I really didn't. There's been a misunderstanding." Alexander raised his hand slightly, signaling Blake to stop talking. He stood there, his eyes now like a mirror reflecting the deep mistakes and harmful prejudices Blake and Richard had committed. After a tense pause, Alexander spoke again, his voice lowering, but carrying a weight that both Blake and Richard could not escape. "No, Mr. Thompson, this is not a misunderstanding. This is exactly discrimination, something that my wife and I cannot accept. I came here today to give you two the chance to clearly recognize the serious mistakes you've made." Blake lowered his head, unable to meet Alexander's eyes any longer, completely devoid of the usual confidence and arrogance. Richard Mason also stood silent, his face tight with tension and embarrassment. Alexander continued, his voice clear and resolute, yet still maintaining his elegance and composure. "I want you both to understand that judging a person based on their appearance or the color of their skin is an unacceptable wrong. Maggie is not just my wife. She is an extraordinary woman, one who has dedicated her life to protecting the rights of the vulnerable, and yesterday she became a direct victim of your narrow-minded, indifferent prejudice." Alexander's words rang out clearly, each sentence cutting deep into the consciences of Blake and Richard like a sharp knife. The showroom fell silent, the air thick with tension, every employee's gaze fixed on the three of them, watching the unfolding events in stunned astonishment. Finally, Alexander stopped, his eyes quickly scanning both Blake and Richard, before he softly added one last statement, one that both men would never forget. "Now, I want to hear a clear explanation from both of you, not for me, but for Maggie Collins and everyone else like her, those who still endure discrimination every day simply because of their skin color and appearance." The atmosphere in the showroom was now charged with an unbearable intensity, and Blake realized clearly that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life, a mistake he would not easily overcome unless he found the courage to truly face it, admit his wrongs, and make amends sincerely. The air in the showroom was heavy and suffocating. Blake felt his throat tighten, as if every word that Alexander had just spoken was a stone pressing down, making it hard for him to breathe. He had never been in such an awkward situation before, feeling both humiliated and terrified, while also experiencing a deep sense of shame. Blake looked toward Richard Mason for help, but the respected dealership owner stood silently, his face pale and lacking the usual confident demeanor. It was clear that Richard was avoiding the cold stare from Alexander Collins, the powerful billionaire who had just revealed the identity of his wife, whom both men had insulted. After a moment of awkwardness, Blake gathered what little courage he had left to speak up. "Mr. Collins, I am truly sorry for what happened yesterday. I didn't know Maggie was your wife. If I had known, I would never have acted the way I did." Alexander immediately cut Blake off, his voice stern but calm. "You still don't understand, Blake. The issue is not whether Maggie is my wife. The issue is that you treated her poorly, with disrespect, and with prejudice just because of her appearance and the color of her skin. This is unacceptable, no matter who the person being insulted is." These words from Alexander made Blake lower his head even further, his face burning with shame. He had never imagined that his actions would be exposed so clearly and directly. At that moment, Blake understood that there was no excuse left for him, and the only thing he could do now was to find a way to ease the tension with the powerful guest in front of him. Blake took a deep breath, his voice trembling as he tried to speak more clearly. "I understand, sir. I take full responsibility for my mistake, and am willing to do whatever it takes to make amends. I just hope that you and Mrs. Maggie can forgive me and give me a chance." Alexander stared at Blake for a long moment, his deep gaze seemingly searching for some sign of sincerity in his remorse. A tense silence hung in the showroom before Alexander spoke again, his tone now softer, though still firm and resolute. "Blake, I could easily use my power and wealth to make you and Mr. Mason pay dearly for your mistake. But my wife Maggie would never want that, she believes in education, in compassion, and in the ability of people to change. Blake lifted his head slightly, a flicker of hope appearing in his eyes. Alexander continued, speaking clearly, each word slow but authoritative. I want you to truly understand the mistakes you've made, not just by saying the words, but by having a real experience of it. Therefore, I have a condition for you to make amends to Maggie, and it's the best way for you to truly learn the profound lesson about respect and racial equality. Blake listened carefully to every word Alexander said, struggling to keep his legs from trembling. He understood that the billionaire in front of him wasn't joking, and this condition might very well be his last chance to salvage some dignity and position in his career. Alexander slowly continued, This weekend, Maggie will be hosting a major charity fundraiser for the Collins Foundation to support underprivileged children of color. I want you to be there, not as a guest, but as a volunteer, directly serving and assisting the children and their families. Blake was momentarily stunned when he heard the word volunteer. This was certainly not the condition he had initially imagined. Blake had never participated in any charitable activities before, especially events where he would have to face directly the people he had previously looked down upon with deep prejudice. For him, taking on this role felt like a severe punishment. But as Blake prepared to protest or find an excuse, he met Alexander's stern gaze. Blake immediately understood that he had no choice but to accept the request. He swallowed hard, his voice growing quieter. I understand, Mr. Collins. I will participate as a volunteer, as you have requested. I hope this will, in some way, make up for the mistake I made with Mrs. Maggie. Alexander nodded slowly, his expression still serious, but his voice softened. Good. I hope that when you face those whom you once looked down upon, you will truly understand that their worth is not in their appearance or the color of their skin, but in the person they are, the character they carry, and the resilience they've always shown. This is not just an opportunity for you to make amends, Blake. This is an opportunity for you to completely change how you see the world around you. Blake silently nodded again, the feeling of shame slowly being replaced by deeper reflection. Perhaps Alexander Collins was right. This wasn't just a punishment, but a real chance for him to confront his own prejudices, many of which he had long failed to acknowledge or had deliberately ignored. In that moment, Blake knew he was stepping into a journey that wouldn't be easy, a journey that would force him to face his deep mistakes, but also the only path through which he could regain his dignity, self-respect, and more importantly, become a better person, one who respected and treated everyone around him fairly, regardless of who they were. The Saturday morning arrived faster than Blake had imagined. He stood in front of the large mirror in his private room, tightening his dark blue tie, but then remembered that he wasn't supposed to be at the showroom today. Instead, he would be attending a charity volunteer event, an experience completely foreign to him, outside of his comfort zone. His usual tie and luxurious suit, things he had always considered his shield of pride, had to be replaced with a simple white t-shirt emblazoned with the Collins Foundation logo and a pair of casual jeans. Blake looked at himself in the mirror, feeling a strange sense of discomfort. He knew full well that he didn't want to be at this event. If it weren't for Alexander Collins's strict conditions, he would never have considered spending his weekend as a volunteer, serving people he had once deeply looked down upon. But Blake had no choice. His career, reputation, and even his self-esteem were now in Alexander Collins' hands. One more mistake, and everything he had built over the years could be destroyed. When he walked into the event center, Blake was surprised to find the atmosphere filled with energy and laughter. The black, disabled children, whom he had once unconsciously looked down on, were now happily playing and laughing, their eyes full of joy and excitement as they participated in well-organized interactive games and activities in the outdoor area. Beside them were loving parents, young volunteers, and charity staff members who were always ready with a friendly smile. Maggie Collins appeared from a distance, gently chatting with the children and their families. She wore simple clothes, her eyes and smile full of sincere warmth. Looking at Maggie, Blake finally understood why Alexander Collins held such deep admiration for his wife. She wasn't just a gracious woman, she possessed a rare inner beauty, one born from kindness and a genuine understanding of people. A staff member from the foundation quickly guided Blake to his role, helping to serve food and assist the disabled children with some of the physical activities. At first, Blake felt very awkward, standing quietly in a corner, trying to avoid the gazes of those around him. But soon, he felt a small hand firmly grasp his. Blake looked down, surprised to see an 8-year-old black boy sitting in a small wheelchair, gazing up at him with clear eyes and a beaming smile. "Could you help me get that ball? I want to play, but I can't reach it," the boy asked. At that genuine smile, Blake's heart softened. He bent down gently, picked up the ball, and handed it to the boy. The boy smiled and thanked him cheerfully before starting an excited conversation with Blake, as if they had known each other for years. "My name is Thomas. What's your name?" the boy asked. I'm Blake," he replied awkwardly, but suddenly felt much lighter as he heard the boy's clear voice. Throughout that morning, Blake began to interact more closely with Thomas and the other children. The more time he spent with them, the more he felt their incredible energy, their strength in overcoming obstacles, and their admirable joy and optimism. Each child had a different story, but they all shared a common trait: sincerity, innocence, and a heart full of trust in life. Blake began to feel ashamed when he remembered the disdain and contempt he had once shown toward Maggie and people like them, simply based on their appearance and skin color. Those prejudices now made him feel small and shallow. When he looked at these children, he no longer saw racial differences. He saw resilience, kindness, and the purest joy for life. At lunchtime, Maggie gently approached Blake. He was slightly startled, his eyes a bit awkward as he looked at her. But Maggie simply smiled warmly, her voice full of sincerity. "Thank you for being here today, Blake. I truly appreciate it." Blake lowered his head, awkwardly responding, "No, I should be the one thanking you, Maggie. I'm really sorry for what I did to you that day. I was so wrong and foolish." Maggie looked at Blake gently, her voice still warm. "I know you're starting to understand. What matters is that you've given yourself the chance to see the good things you never noticed before. That's what truly matters." Blake felt an unexpected sense of relief hearing her words. For the first time in many years of living with prejudice, he realized that the thing that had separated him from others wasn't the color of their skin or their appearance. It was the blindness and biases he had nurtured within himself. When the volunteer event ended that day, Blake stood silently, watching as the children joyfully left the event area with their parents. He realized that he had experienced a day far more special than any he had lived before. A day that had truly made him face the wrong prejudices within himself and allowed his heart to open more than ever. In that moment, Blake knew that he had changed. It was an unexpected but deeply meaningful change. A change not only in how he viewed the world around him, but also in who he had become, helping him take another significant step on his journey to rediscovering himself. As the evening slowly descended, the soft orange hues of the sunset bathed the vast grounds of the charity event. The atmosphere had quieted down, but the warmth and love were still evident on the faces of every attendee. Blake stood quietly in a corner, watching the families leave with smiles on their faces, and a new, unfamiliar emotion stirred within him. A sense of peace mingled with a deep shame for the things he had once thought and done. The sounds of children laughing and playing, the same children he had spent the day with, still echoed in the air, each sound serving as a reminder of the innocence and genuine kindness he had lost long ago when he had allowed blind prejudice to cloud his mind and heart. Images from the past replayed clearly in Blake's mind, like a slow-motion film showing his arrogance, harsh words, and the unreasonable contempt he had shown toward the simple, patient, and dignified woman, Maggie Collins. In that moment, Blake felt his heart tighten, heavy with regret. He knew he couldn't let everything pass by without directly confronting his mistakes. It was time for him to show sincere remorse, not just to Maggie, but to everyone present, those who had taught him the most profound lesson of his life about respect and equality. Taking a deep breath to muster his courage, Blake walked toward Maggie. She was standing near the stage, having a warm conversation with her husband, Alexander Collins, and a few people from the organizing team. Blake's sudden appearance made all eyes turn toward him, creating a brief but palpable silence filled with curiosity and tension. Blake stood in front of Maggie, his gaze briefly lowering, but then he quickly lifted his head and looked her straight in the eye, speaking with sincerity. "Maggie, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness after everything I've done, but today I want to sincerely apologize to you, right here in front of everyone." His clear, decisive words made the entire space fall silent. Maggie flinched slightly, her eyes showing a moment of surprise, but quickly softening, looking at him with understanding and encouragement. "Blake, you don't have to do this." But Blake immediately interrupted her, his voice continuing to ring out clearly, stronger than before. "No, Maggie, I need to do this. I need to face my mistakes directly. I treated you terribly and shamefully, simply because of my foolish prejudice about appearances and skin color. I once thought that a person's worth was determined by the clothes they wore, their looks, or even their race. But I was completely wrong." Blake's gaze now turned to the people around him, his voice trembling slightly but full of sincerity. "Today, after meeting, talking, and playing with the wonderful children here, I've truly realized that I let narrow-minded prejudices blind my soul. I lost the ability to see the real value inside every person because of my own narrowness and selfishness." Blake paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and continued, his voice now more certain. "That's why, today, I stand here to apologize to Maggie, to apologize to everyone who has been hurt by my attitude. I commit to changing, not just for myself, but also to completely change the way I run my business at Boston Luxury Motors from now on. I promise I will never judge a customer based on their skin color, appearance, or anything other than the respect and dignity that every person deserves." Blake's heartfelt words echoed through the quiet, attentive air of the crowd. Maggie looked at him for a long moment, her eyes now full of emotion and empathy. She gently walked over, smiled, and placed her hand on his shoulder, her voice soft as always. "Thank you, Blake. I truly accept your apology. The important thing is that you've understood, and I believe you will keep your promise." The atmosphere in the space suddenly felt lighter. Alexander Collins also walked over, nodding approvingly and placing a hand on Blake's shoulder in support. At that moment, Blake felt as though his heart had been freed from a huge burden he had been carrying for so long. He looked around and saw friendly and understanding gazes from those he had once held prejudices against, people who had now become friends he genuinely valued. In that moment, Blake realized that this wasn't just a simple apology, but a major turning point in his life. A moment when he truly found himself again, found the person he had once lost. His sincere remorse not only helped heal the wounds he had caused Maggie, but also opened a new path for him. The evening ended on a note of calm and peace. Blake left with a heart at ease and a renewed sense of determination. He understood that true change wouldn't be easy, but he also believed that from that day forward, every action and decision of his would be guided by understanding, compassion, and genuine respect for everyone. He knew that this was the best way for him to redeem his past mistakes and become a truly better person in the future. As Blake's sincere words came to an end, the atmosphere of the event seemed to explode in a wave of gentle emotions. The gazes of those around him shifted from surprise to sympathy and encouragement for Blake, a man who had truly found the courage to reflect on himself. Standing quietly not far away, Alexander Collins watched the entire scene unfold, his sharp gaze softening, clearly showing a sense of satisfaction mixed with emotion at the genuine change happening within Blake. Alexander was a man of experience, with enough wisdom to distinguish true remorse from mere words spoken to soothe immediate consequences. At that moment, as he looked at Blake, he saw a rare sincerity in his eyes, something he had never witnessed before. He realized that the man before him had truly changed from the inside, and that change deserved a second chance. As the event neared its end, Alexander slowly walked toward Blake. His appearance immediately drew the attention of those around him, creating a meaningful and emotional moment. Blake was a bit surprised to see Alexander approaching, his gaze tinged with worry, but Mr. Collins quickly smiled gently, offering reassurance. "Blake, I'd like to talk to you for a moment if you have the time." Blake nodded instantly, without hesitation. Alexander led him to a more private corner where they could speak freely without interruption. The atmosphere between the two of them was now completely different from the tense encounter in the showroom earlier. Alexander looked directly into Blake's eyes, his voice gentle yet clear. "I've listened carefully to everything you said to Maggie and everyone here today. Honestly, I'm deeply moved by your sincerity and determination to change. This shows me that the mistakes of the past are no longer the most important thing. What matters is how we face them and how we move forward." Blake listened intently, feeling a lump in his throat from the emotion. He knew that Alexander was not only a man of power, but also a person of depth, who always saw the best in people. Those words gave him strength and belief to move forward, leaving behind the shameful mistakes of his past. Alexander continued, his voice now warmer. "Because of that, I've decided to give you a second chance. I want you to personally handle the sale of the Bentley Continental GT Mulliner to Maggie. This is a very special gift she wants to give her beloved sister, who has just overcome a difficult battle with cancer." Blake was truly shocked upon hearing this. He never imagined that Alexander would trust him with this important responsibility, the very luxury car that had been the cause of the most embarrassing incident in his life. But it was this trust that made Blake feel both grateful and ashamed. He immediately nodded, his voice full of emotion and gratitude. I'm truly grateful for this opportunity, Mr. Collins. I promise you, I will do everything I can to ensure that Maggie and her sister receive a truly meaningful and special gift." Alexander smiled contentedly. He could clearly see the sincerity in Blake's words. But Alexander was not finished yet. He continued, his tone firm and clear. "Not only that, Blake. I had previously considered a major deal to upgrade my fleet of cars at Boston Luxury Motors. but after the unfortunate incident, I decided to cancel that plan. However, today, after witnessing the real change in you, I am willing to reconsider. I want you to personally handle the entire deal. A deal that is not just about economic value, but also a symbol of trust and a second chance that I'm giving you." Blake heard these words, and his heart felt completely freed from the pressure and haunting thoughts of the past. He had not only received a new opportunity in his career, but also genuine forgiveness, valuable trust from the very person he had once offended. For Blake, this was not just a business deal, but a huge chance to truly make amends and step into a better chapter of his life. He looked deep into Alexander's eyes, his voice trembling lightly but full of determination. "I understand your generosity and kindness, Mr. Collins. I promise that from this day forward, every decision I make in my work and in life will always prioritize respect and human dignity. I will never lose your trust again." Alexander placed his hand gently on Blake's shoulder, his gaze warm and encouraging. "I believe in you, Blake. Don't let me down. And most importantly, don't let yourself down." In that moment, Blake felt as though he had truly been reborn. Not only his career but his soul and his perspective on the world around him had completely changed. He knew that from now on, every step he took would not only be for his own benefit, but to contribute to creating a more just and compassionate society. A society where the value of every person is judged by their character and kind heart, not by their appearance or skin color. That afternoon, Blake left the event with a heart full of gratitude and a profound sense of peace he had never felt before. He understood that he had been given the most precious opportunity, not only to atone for his mistakes, but also to become the person he truly wanted to be, someone who lives and treats others with the utmost respect and genuine kindness. A month later, the Boston sky that evening seemed to be adorned with thousands of sparkling lights, radiating from the Grand Boston Hotel, the venue for the annual charity gala of the Collins Foundation. The luxurious atmosphere of the Grand Hall was now warmer than ever, thanks to the presence of hundreds of distinguished guests who had come together to support and contribute to building a better, more humane society. In a small corner of the event, Blake stood quietly, offering a gentle and sincere smile as he greeted each guest entering the hall. Gone was the expensive suit, replaced by a simple volunteer uniform with the Collins Foundation logo. It was this simplicity that now highlighted his humility and authenticity. His heart no longer felt unfamiliar or forced, as it did when he first participated in the charity event. Instead, now he felt a deep sense of peace, naturalness, and sincerity from within. Not long after, Alexander and Maggie appeared beside Blake. Maggie smiled warmly when she saw him standing there, and Alexander gently patted him on the shoulder, his deep voice encouraging. "You look relaxed and happy today, Blake. I'm glad to see that." Blake turned to him, nodding lightly, his voice full of emotion but also confidence. "Thank you, Alexander. Honestly, I've never felt as peaceful and happy as I do today. The past month has truly been the most meaningful time in my life. Thanks to you, Maggie, and the children I met along the way, I've learned the deepest lesson about the true value of human beings." Maggie looked at Blake with a tender, encouraging gaze, prompting him to continue. Blake took a deep breath and continued in his sincere voice, each word touching the hearts of both Alexander and Maggie. "I used to think a person's value was based on their appearance, the expensive clothes they wear, or even their skin color. But when I truly opened my heart and connected with those I once looked down on, I realized how wrong I had been. These prejudices were just a narrow shell that had covered my eyes and heart for so long." He paused for a moment, a hint of sadness in his eyes as he recalled the painful memories of his past. But then he quickly regained his composure and spoke more clearly, strongly. "The most important lesson I've learned is that a person's true value is never found in superficial things. Instead, true value lies in dignity, kindness, sincerity, and how we treat others, especially those who don't bring us any material benefit." Alexander listened to these words, his gaze full of satisfaction and pride. Maggie nodded gently, feeling a deep warmth in her heart. Blake had truly changed, and she was genuinely happy to witness it. Then Blake looked towards the guests mingling in the gala space, his eyes full of hope and pride. He continued speaking in a soft voice, as if reminding himself, "Now, every day when I step into the showroom, I remind myself and my colleagues that we must never judge a customer by their appearance or background. I want to create a new corporate culture where respect and kindness are the top priorities. I want every customer who walks into Boston Luxury Motors to feel that they are valued for who they truly are, not for their money or appearance." Alexander smiled gently, giving Blake's shoulder another light pat. "I believe you will achieve that, Blake. And I also believe that what you are doing will bring real, meaningful value to this community." Maggie then gently spoke up, her voice full of warmth. "Blake, the most important thing is that you truly understand and are determined to change. We've always believed in you, and we hope that this story will help others realize the same." Blake felt his heart warmer than ever when he heard those words. He understood that his change wasn't just helping him become a better person. It was inspiring many others who, like him, had unknowingly been hurt by blind prejudice. The charity gala concluded in brilliant success, but the most profound message about the true value of human beings was what remained strongest in the hearts of everyone in attendance. As they left the event, each person carried with them a new awareness, a stronger determination to create a fairer and kinder world. And in that moment, the story of Maggie, Alexander, and especially Blake's profound transformation became a valuable, deeply humane, and moving lesson for everyone. The true value of a person is never determined by their skin color, clothing, or flashy appearance. It always lies in their dignity, respect, and deep kindness towards one another. That was the lesson Blake had to go through many challenges, pain, and mistakes to truly understand, but it was this lesson that helped him find himself, become the person he always wanted to be, someone who lives for others, who loves, and most importantly, knows how to treat everyone with sincerity, fairness, and true kindness. The story of Maggie, Alexander, and Blake's emotional journey of change is a profound reminder that the true value of a person is never decided by their skin color, clothes, or outward appearance. What matters most is the dignity, kindness, and respect we show each other. Have you ever experienced or witnessed a story similar to Maggie and Blake's? Share your thoughts and experiences with us in the comments below. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel to continue following the next inspiring and moving stories. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next story.